Hello and welcome to the English Speaking Studio. I'm Jack.
And I'm Lucy.
All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into a subject that is, well, let's face it, kind of universally fascinating.
Yeah, I'd say so.
We're talking building and sustaining a healthy relationship. It actually takes a lot of skill.
It really does. It's like any other skill. You have to learn it and practice it.
It's true. So let's jump right in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, interesting question. Why do relationships matter? And they made the point that for a lot of people, romantic relationships are one of the most fulfilling and meaningful parts of life.
For sure.
But then they went on to say something that honestly kind of blew my mind. They said that our capacity for those deep, lasting bonds, those secure and loving connections, it might actually stem from our earliest experiences, like way back in infancy.
Isn't that fascinating? It really makes you think about how much those early years shape us.
It does. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. There's this theory out there called attachment theory. And basically, it suggests that the way our needs were met as infants, the quality of our interactions with our caregivers, those first relationships we have, it can have a big impact on the kinds of relationships we form as adults.
So like if your caregiver was super attentive and responsive when you were a baby, you might be more likely to form secure attachments as an adult.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if your needs weren't consistently met as a child, it could lead to more anxious or avoidant attachment styles later on.
Wow. So understanding your own attachment style, that could be incredibly insightful.
I think so. It can really help you make sense of patterns in your relationships, why you might be drawn to certain types of people or why certain dynamics keep repeating.
That makes total sense. So it's not about blaming your childhood for everything, right?
Yeah.
It's more about just like gaining some self-awareness.
Exactly. It's about understanding how your past might be influencing your present and then using that knowledge to make more conscious choices about the relationships you want to create.
Right, right. Okay, so we've talked about why relationships matter, but what about building those healthy, thriving relationships in the first place? What actually goes into that?
Well, the article highlighted a bunch of important qualities or traits. Some were pretty obvious, like trust and respect, but others were a little less expected.
Yeah, like that whole thing about fairness and chores being like this cornerstone of modern love. I mean, who knew that dish duty could be so pivotal for relationship bliss?
Right. I chuckled at that one too. But, when you think about it, it makes sense. It's not really about the chores themselves. It's more about that sense of equity and respect for each other's time and energy.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like if couples are sharing the load fairly, it creates this feeling of partnership, right?
Yeah.
Like they're in it together.
Exactly. It's that feeling of mutual support. But when there's an imbalance, well, that can definitely breed resentment and conflict.
Okay, so those little arguments about whose turn it is to empty the dishwasher, those might actually be masking deeper issues like maybe about power dynamics or feeling valued.
Exactly. And that's why open and honest communication is so crucial. The article emphasized that strong couples, they're able to talk about their needs and expectations, even when it's about potentially uncomfortable topics.
Yeah, that makes sense. So not just chores, but also finances, maybe even things like sex.
It's all on the table, the good, the bad, the awkward, all of it.
Right, and it's about creating that safe space where you can both be vulnerable and honest with each other. Here, I'm taking notes. So communication is key. But the article also mentioned this other idea that I thought was really interesting. Giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. What did you make of that?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I think that's such a crucial element of trust and goodwill in any relationship.
For sure. But what does that look like in practice?
It basically means assuming positive intent. Believing that your partner has your best interests at heart, even when they mess up.
So instead of jumping to conclusions or getting defensive, you try to understand their perspective.
Right. You give them the space to explain themselves. You approach conflict as a team, trying to work together to resolve the issue, rather than attacking each other.
So you're on the same side, even when things get tough.
Exactly. And that creates a sense of safety and security, which allows you both to be more open and vulnerable with each other, which ultimately I think is what allows love to really flourish.
That's a great point. It's about creating that foundation of trust and support.
Okay, so far we've talked about the importance of communication, fairness, and giving each other the benefit of the doubt. But there was another quality that the article mentioned that I wanted to touch on. This one really jumped out at me because it was kind of unexpected.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It was this idea that a good partner might actually push you outside of your comfort zone, like challenge you to grow.
Now that is interesting. It definitely challenges the idea that love should always be easy and comfortable.
Right. We've all heard that saying about finding someone who completes you. But maybe it's not about finding someone who fills a void.
Maybe it's more about finding someone who challenges you to become a better version of yourself, someone who inspires you to grow.
That's a much more exciting way to think about it. So instead of looking for someone who makes you feel comfortable all the time, maybe you should be looking for someone who makes you feel alive. I love that. Embracing the discomfort that comes with growth, using it as fuel to become more authentic and fully expressed versions of yourselves.
Yes. Now, speaking of pushing boundaries, the article also touched on this other counterintuitive idea, which is that feeling a little bit of anxiety around someone you're interested in might actually be a good sign.
Right. It's like, wait, isn't anxiety supposed to be a bad thing?
Exactly. But they were suggesting that in the context of like a new relationship or a crush, that little flutter of anxiety might actually indicate that the person matters to you. You know, like you're invested.
It's like those butterflies in your stomach, that nervous energy you feel around someone you really like.
Exactly. And maybe that's not a bad thing at all.
Maybe it's a sign that you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to open yourself up to the possibility of something real.
Because let's face it, real intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, well, it always involves a certain level of risk, right?
Absolutely. Which brings us to another really important distinction that the article highlighted, and that's the difference between infatuation and genuine interest.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one. We all love that initial spark, that rush of excitement and passion.
Yeah.
But is that really a reliable indicator of lasting love?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And what the article seemed to be saying is that true connection, the kind that goes the distance, it goes deeper than just that initial infatuation.
So it's about being willing to invest the time and energy to get to know someone deeply, to move beyond the superficial and really build a foundation of shared values and understanding.
Right. And that takes conscious effort. It's about making the choice to nurture the relationship, to be present, to communicate, to support each other's growth.
That's such a good point. It's about making that conscious commitment day after day to keep showing up for each other.
And that, I think, is what ultimately separates a fleeting romance from a truly enduring bond.
Well said. But, of course, even with the best intentions, we all know that not every relationship is meant to last.
That's true. And that's something we'll dive into more in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore some of the challenges that relationships face, even those that seem rock solid.
And one of the stats that really stood out to me from all of this research was that the divorce rate among couples over 50 is actually on the rise.
It is, and it's kind of a sobering reminder, isn't it? Even those relationships that we often think of as like rock solid, even those can face some pretty significant hurdles.
So it's not like you hit a certain milestone, like a 20th anniversary or something, and then suddenly, all of the work is done.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. Relationships, they require ongoing effort, conscious awareness. And that's true even for those long-term partnerships.
Right. Makes sense. So what are some of those common relationship pitfalls? I mean, the article mentioned infidelity, obviously, but are there other maybe less obvious things that can sort of chip away at the foundation of a relationship over time?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's not always about these big dramatic events. Sometimes it's the more subtle stuff, the accumulation of all those little hurts and resentments that just kind of build up over time.
Right, like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly. And, it often boils down to communication patterns, like how do you and your partner handle conflict? The article talked about how criticism, contempt, and defensiveness can create this really toxic cycle. And it can be incredibly damaging in the long run.
So like instead of saying, hey, you always leave your dirty socks on the floor, it's about finding a more constructive way to express those feelings.
Exactly. It's about shifting from blame and accusation to a more understanding and empathetic approach. Maybe something like, hey, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with how messy the house is. Could we maybe work together to keep things tidier?
Oh, okay. That sounds much less like, an attack.
Right, exactly. It's about being partners in solving a problem,
Yeah.
not like, adversaries who are constantly pointing fingers at each other.
I like that. Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Right. And, going back to what we talked about earlier, remember that whole benefit of the doubt thing?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that becomes even more important in those long-term relationships where you're bound to have, those little hurts and annoyances that pop up over time. It's about choosing to focus on your partner's good qualities, their intentions, even when they make a mistake.
Right. So like assuming the best instead of the worst.
Exactly. And giving each other the space to apologize, to make amends, and to ultimately learn and grow from those mistakes. Because we all make them, right?
We do. We do. Okay, this is all super helpful. But one thing that really stood out to me in that article was the emphasis on maintaining intimacy in long-term relationships, which, let's be real, can be tough when you're juggling work, kids, all the other demands of life.
Oh, tell me about it. It's so easy to just let those other things take priority and then intimacy kind of falls by the wayside.
Yeah.
But it's so important. And I'm not just talking about sex here.
Right, right.
It's about feeling connected, both emotionally and physically. It's about making time for those shared moments of closeness and affection.
Okay, so like cuddling on the couch while you're watching a movie, holding hands while you're walking the dog, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. It's about being intentional, creating those small moments of connection, even amidst the chaos of everyday life. And sometimes it means actually scheduling those moments, putting them in your calendar just like you would any other important appointment.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm definitely stealing that one. But, even with all of that effort, it seems like there's still this risk that even seemingly happy couples, they can just kind of drift apart over time.
It's true, and it often happens so gradually that you hardly even notice it at first. It's like couples get stuck in their routines, they stop communicating as openly, and they slowly start losing sight of those shared dreams and values that brought them together in the first place.
That's kind of heartbreaking when you think about it. So
Uh,
how do you prevent that from happening? How do you keep that spark alive over the long haul?
Well, one of the things that the article suggested was to just keep dating each other, even after years of being together. Make time for those special moments, those shared experiences that remind you why you fell in love in the first place.
Oh, I love that. So even if it's just ordering takeout and watching a movie at home, just that intentional time together.
Exactly. It's about creating those rituals of connection and making an effort to prioritize each other even amidst the demands of daily life. And I think it's also about staying curious about each other, continuing to learn and grow together, supporting each other's passions and pursuits.
So it's not about becoming stagnant, but about continuing to evolve, both as individuals and as a couple.
That's it. And it's also about recognizing that relationships, even the good ones, they take work. You have to make that conscious choice day after day to nurture that connection and keep the love alive.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to put it. But let's be realistic for a second. Not every relationship is meant to last. And sometimes, even when you put in the effort, you reach a point where it's just time to move on.
That's true, and it's often a really painful and difficult decision to make. But sometimes ending a relationship, even though it hurts, is actually the healthiest choice, both for yourself and for your partner.
I think that's an important point. And, that brings us to a whole other topic, which is the complexities of navigating breakups and healing from heartbreak.
Right, and it's something that a lot of people struggle with because breakups, they can be brutal.
They can. You're grieving the loss of a relationship. You might be dealing with all sorts of practical challenges. You're trying to rebuild your life. It's a lot to process.
It is, and that's why it's so important to seek support during those times, whether it's from friends, family, a therapist. It really helps to have someone to lean on.
It makes such a difference. And sometimes it's hard to even know where to begin, Like, how do you start to pick up the pieces and move forward?
I think the first step is just giving yourself permission to grieve, to process the loss, to heal at your own pace. And it's also about recognizing that even though breakups are painful, they can also be incredible opportunities for growth and self-discovery.
So it's about finding those lessons in the experience, learning from the past, and using that knowledge to create a brighter future.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that endings, even difficult ones, can be catalysts for new beginnings. And that sometimes letting go of something that's no longer serving you, that's the bravest and most loving thing you can do.
Man, that's powerful. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges of maintaining long-term relationships and the complexities of breakups. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I did want to circle back to a topic that I think sometimes gets a little glossed over, and that's the role of sex and intimacy in relationships.
It's definitely an important one, and I think you're right. It's something that we often shy away from talking about, even though it's such a fundamental part of romantic relationships.
Totally. And one of the articles we read, it pointed out that it's not just about the physical act, right? It's about emotional intimacy, vulnerability, that sense of closeness.
So true. But I think the challenge for a lot of couples is just learning how to communicate openly and honestly about their sexual needs and desires.
Right. It can be awkward, even with someone you're super close to. So any tips on how to get better at those conversations?
Well, one thing the article emphasized was the importance of creating a safe and non-judgmental space for those conversations.
Right.
Like, it's about letting go of shame and approaching the topic with curiosity and a willingness to learn about each other's preferences.
So instead of like assuming you know what your partner wants, you actually ask, and then you really listen without judgment.
Exactly. And it's about being able to express your own needs and desires, in a way that's clear and assertive, but not aggressive.
Oh, that makes sense.
Like, instead of saying something like, you never initiate sex anymore, which can feel kind of accusatory, you could try something like, I really love it when you make the first move. It makes me feel so desired.
Oh, I like that. It's like you're framing it in a positive way, focusing on what you enjoy rather than what's lacking.
Right, exactly. And, it's also about being open to trying new things together to keep things interesting and prevent things from getting, well, too routine.
Okay, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
But what happens when those desires don't align? Like, what if one partner wants more intimacy while the other one is, feeling less interested?
That's definitely a common challenge, and it can be really tough to navigate. But I think the most important thing is to avoid blame and assumptions.
Okay, so like, don't immediately jump to the conclusion that your partner's not attracted to you anymore.
Right. Instead of going there, try to really understand what might be contributing to their shift in desire.
So like, could it be stress from work,
Yeah.
health concerns, maybe hormonal changes, even just feeling kind of overwhelmed with life in general?
All of those things. And it's about approaching those conversations with empathy and curiosity, not judgment or criticism.
And it's important to remember, too, that sexual desire, it naturally fluctuates over time for individuals and within a relationship, too.
Exactly. It's not a static thing. And that just highlights the importance of ongoing communication and a willingness to kind of adapt to each other's changing needs.
So basically, open, honest, compassionate communication. That's the key to navigating all of this, right?
Absolutely. And, it's not just about talking about sex, but about creating this dynamic of intimacy and connection that goes beyond the bedroom.
So all those little things, the hugs, the kisses, the shared moments of laughter, just that feeling of being truly seen and understood by your partner.
It's all connected. And it's about cultivating that deep and meaningful connection that nourishes your relationship, like on every level.
That is a beautiful way to put it. And, I think it's a great reminder that while we've been focusing on romantic relationships today, a lot of these skills that we've been talking about, communication, empathy, vulnerability, these are essential for all kinds of relationships in our lives, yeah?
Absolutely. Whether it's with family, friends, colleagues, all of those relationships can benefit from those same principles.
It's not just about finding a partner, but about like creating a richer, more connected life overall.
Well said. We humans, we're social creatures. We thrive on those connections. And, those connections and all their messy and beautiful complexity, they're really what make life worth living.
Could not agree more. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We talked about the foundations of healthy relationships, the challenges, the joys, the heartbreak, and everything in between.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And to our listeners, we encourage you to take what you've learned today. Use it, apply it to your own relationships. Remember, love, it's a journey, not a destination. And it might not always be easy, but it can be incredibly rewarding. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, keep diving deep.